Interact. I'm going to listen to you. I'm sitting in the front. I can listen better than sitting beside. Good evening, friends. Those who have joined us. IFA as well as we have a lot of interesting audience joined us online. Today we have professors, we have participants joined to the platform. I also extend a warm welcome to all of you. There's a saying in management, Peter Drucker says there's an echo. What you can't manage is what you can't measure. But we don't know now until and unless we measure whether we are going in a successful way or not so successful. But we often struggle to define the parameters, the indicators for measurement. I'm sure from last 3 days we are now experiencing that. How difficult it is to come out with a proper evaluation question. Evaluation question is easy, but how difficult it is to see the indicators and the source of data to measure those indicators. Even at home, like even to cook rice, if our mother says, okay, ensure that rice is properly cooked. So we keep a lot of measures, right? So either we count visuals or we go take a scoop and just check in our hand whether rice is cooked properly or not. But when we need so many indicators to just cook the rice, how many indicators, how many parameters we have, and we really want to monitor at a large scale level. And being from the implementation background myself personally, I know how many times we fail in ensuring proper processes. The policy makers develop a wonderful plan, lock frame, a theory of change, etc. But many times they leave the processes of implementation, which has to be completely sometimes staggered according to the audience, the community dynamic, the people we work with. So looking into the resource constraints, etc. So we often fail there. So there are a lot of dimensions and complexities when it comes to monitoring and managing large scale. Today, I'm very sure that we will find answers for some of these questions, concepts behind or mechanisms behind what we should have to monitor and manage this kind of large scale government. We have a very knowledgeable person having an expertise in this sector with us to talk about all these things today. I welcome Dr. Sekhar Bonu sir, PG Director General DMEO NITI Aayog. Quite delighted to take you all through the biosketch of Dr. Sekhar Bonu. He's worried that you tell, you know what? I don't say that. Yeah, it's very quick, if I may say, it might personal. It's not very quick. It's, Indian Administrative Service Officer leaving that service, joining the various government banks and secretariat government bank. I myself read some of excellent papers. I'm saying again that way I'm an indirect student going through his papers. So and now after becoming PGT and DO, taking a lot of mechanism, empanelling agencies, family care studies, encouraging small organizations to get empaneled and do this monitoring and evaluation. So that's something in brief I would say. Welcome you sir for this session. And he's very good in infrastructure. Very few people know that. Yes, yes. And friends, also it's an honor that we have Sachin Chaturvedi, Director General of RIS, with us today. Professor Sachin Chaturvedi is currently a Director General at the Research and Information System for European countries, and newly based think tank
He works on issues related to development economics involving development finance, SDGs, and social cooperation. Apart from that, trade investment and innovations in leaders with special focus on WD communities. Is actually no, is in various committees, bodies, etc. Has written wonderful various successful books. I suggest you to read through and go through his profile. So thank you so much for accepting our invitation. And he just landed this morning to Delhi today, and we can consider very nice. So with this, I request Sekhar Bonu to take the presentation.
So, as I said, I can keep on talking on it is check. So, the way we take this through is I'll try to explain a little bit about what DMEO is about. DMEO is Development Monitoring Management. To set the context, since I've been asked to talk about large government schemes, I would also like to talk a little bit about union budget. And within that union budget, what are the development projects and what are these when we say large development project schemes? Then large part of you.
No, I see. But people online.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So many of you have we have some experience in education sector. When I say background to outcome-based monitoring, why are we putting so much of emphasis on outcomes? Can anyone say why is there so much of emphasis on outcomes? Just from education side, from primary education side, is there someone who can explain why is it so important we should focus on outcomes? And you say, no, I am in vocational education. So okay, I don't want to give in right spot, but the point is, what is education for? Ultimately, the kids have to require foundational education, so that they can become learners throughout their life. And if after fifth grade, the students just have first or second grade skill set, they can't read. Our ninth graders don't even second grade. What's the point of putting all the schools and putting so much of money? The school has just become like a daycare center. That's why I actually So outcome is so critical. If you don't try to achieve the outcomes of whatever scheme that you're proposing, all the money that you are putting as of noise, you are delivering some activities. So DMEO is about measuring outcomes and building accountability of the outcomes in the system. So for that, we have come with the output outcome monitoring framework. Then I will also take you through one department, rural development department, on how we do it. But the truth is, if you are sitting in your office and just looking at some numbers, then through Nareka, I want to explain how things can really go wrong and why it's so important that you need to do ground truthing where you need to have a sort of a independent third party evaluation, whether it's concurrent. So the government reports its data, which is called an administrative data, to which monitoring is done. That's self-reported. And we are going to penalize people or judge people, whoever is generating the data. So they will always want to present a positive picture. So whatever we see is very different from the reality. So once in a while, I think it's very important for us to go to the field and I think that's what we have been doing for past 7 or 8 days, the quantitative methods that we are talking about. But unlike the Western world from where it was from Cornell, India's institutions, India's political context, Indian sociological and anthropological context is so diverse across. So A plus B, 1 plus 1 is not going to be 2, it's something different. Because, and it keeps on changing from place to place. So that is where I think, and we don't have quantitative methods to understand what's happening in Indian very, very diverse world. There are 100 factors responsible for the outcome. You are doing something, there are 100 factors which are interacting, leading to outcome. And our sciences have not developed to that extent. So the best thing is qualitatively you try to understand, you go to 10 people and talk to them and try to understand. So as Dr. Balu and Dr. Sachin you're talking about, our development process is not linear. It will have many impacts. So I think I think we need to use multiple.
It's the phone by phone. Your phone probably is sleeping.
Other phones can you put it to silent mode or whatever mode that is.
Yeah, no, I think it's good. So so through Mariga, I think we will try to explain and then take some time to explain. So development monitoring evaluation office is the effects monitoring and evaluation of nation of this country. It was established in 2015 by merging program evaluation office, which was for the first plan period, and the independent evaluation office. So in our office, we have multiple functions. We do monitoring, we also do evaluation, and we also are very committed to building monitoring and evaluation capabilities across the ecosystem. So we work with ministry departments in the government of India, state governments. We also work with civil society organizations because the capacities within the government are limited. So the best way we can really achieve the outcomes is to build capacities outside the ecosystem. So we want to work with different universities. Since today I've been asked Randy to talk about monitoring, I'll stick to monitoring. So I'll pause here. Tell me a little bit about the union. So how big is India's budget? So the last budget in 2022-23, how many lakh crores was it? And compared to the GDP of this country, what's the percentage of union? Some guess. Is it 1 crore, 10 crore? So how much is NITI? Or some scheme you just tell me how big is that scheme? Whatever big scheme you think across the country would be the budget.
So NREGA is 41,000 crores. Yeah.
Okay. NREGA is
41,000 crores. Union budget was 41 lakh crores. So we had the benefit of the finance secretary visit this week, and the size of GDP is the 3 trillion. So it's about 3 trillion USD. 3 trillion.
Okay. Yours so close. So basically, union budget is if you don't consider public sector undertaking funds, it's around 39 lakh crore. Including public sector undertaking funds, it's around 44 lakh crores. MD Narega was 40,000 crore like 4-5 years back. Now it's 90,000 crore. And so last year it has crossed even 1 lakh crore. So so what is the composition of union budget? Because we want to understand large scheme. So what are the different things? And 41 lakh crore, what would be the composition? How much would be salaries? How much would be pension? How much would be large schemes? Okay, so let me take you through. So this pie chart gives you an indication of the left side pie chart is basically budget estimates without public sector undertaking funds. When I say public sector undertaking, these are all the enterprises under the government, like Petroleum, Coal India. They have their own budget outside the consolidated fund. So around 39 lakh crore was the last budget, in which around 7 lakh was establishment. But our focus today is on central sector and central small scale. So out of 40 lakh crores, let's round it off. Around 15 lakh crore goes for central sector and central sponsor schemes. So this is where engineering is, this is where road projects are, this is where rail projects are. The rest are all interest payments and transfers to the state and so establishment expenditure and so. The next question I want to ask is what is central? What is the difference between centrally sponsored scheme and central sector schemes? Because we are saying that central sector is around 11 lakh crore and centrally sponsored scheme is around 5 lakh, 4.5 lakh. So what's the key difference between both of them? And what's your name? From? So central sector is 100% government of India. Central is what's the scheme? So central sector is basically government of India 100%. Largely, these are mandates of government of India, and centrally sponsored schemes are somewhere between 60% government of India, 40%, and largely these are subjects where both state and central has, or where state is primarily responsible for it. It's education, health, rural development. So tell me, name around 5 large centrally sponsored schemes. We have already started with engineering, but what are the other large centrally sponsored schemes?
Enabling,
Okay.
NHM, nature health research.
That is central sector, central sponsored.
Service Shiksha.
Service Shiksha, centrally sponsored. About drinking water. Something big happening. What about roads and housing?
Housing and
Yes. Okay. So basically, this is the picture. The engineering estimates are 73 lakh crore, but finally it will cross beyond 90 in the price. These are estimates, but revised and then finally start going. Jal Jeevan Mission is huge initiative. It's second largest, around 60,000 crore. It will go on for next 3-4 years, and then there is this huge initiative to build houses for people in the poor, right? Both in urban India and rural India. That's the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana. And then Pradhan Mantri GRAAM Sadak Yojana. It used to have huge investments earlier. Now it is tapering. It's coming to months. Then Amrut and smart cities. Anyone can tell a little bit Amrut? What is Amrut?
Regeneration of urban transformation in education. So it's not a town. Tier 3, tier.
And it's for all towns to 500 artist town. Smart city last.
Tier 1, tier 2.
So this is it. And coming to central sector, guess which is the largest central sector scheme? Or one or two, first 2 or 3. Department of Telecom, like BharatNet. But there was around 50,000 investment from BSNL. Any idea what it is? It's not in central sector or central sponsor, it's in other central sectors.
Fiber.
No, it is equity infusion, it's really. BSNL is like area making so much of losses. So once in a couple of years, government infused equity. So last year there was around 50,000 crore equity. So coming to central sector, we have National Highway Authority, NHA, roads are the biggest ticket. You can see first and second. Then railways also has equal amount, but it's divided into different type of projects. So doubling of lane, electrification, and so on. Army is another big one. DOT has two of them. Compensation for service providers. That's the DOT scheme, which I think also includes BSNL also. Sorry, BharatNet. So now, once we have come to know what schemes are, so I already mentioned outcomes. No? So what is difference? Key difference between output activities, outputs, and anyway, right at the beginning, I emphasized why outcomes are important. So what's the difference between outputs and outputs?
One more
Major impact on-
beneficiaries. Quantity, outcome is qualitative. Quality of.
Okay, and this side, anyone?
Immediate change, that particular thing, this is the output. If we are measuring the change in the longer term, that could be the outcome.
So let us take primary school education. What is output and what is output?
Second, government school is out. It is open. Students get benefited.
When we use the benefit of what we mean.
But it is not benefited. Gross enrollment ratio. Indicators of output indicator, GRAAM gross enrollment ratio.
So I think we are somewhere close. Broadly, when you give money, that is the input. So money translates into money and some human resources. Those are the inputs. Then it leads to some activities. It can be teachers training, it can be textbooks, it can be construction schools and so on. And then activities obviously lead to activities within the classroom, teaching, learning. So the outputs are directly related to the activities. So you build a school, it results in construction of a school. Then there is some teaching that takes place in the classroom. These are activities, outputs resulting from the activities. Outcomes are something which are articulated in the. See, no scheme is Samshiksha Abhiyan. It doesn't say that, oh, it will lead to 1,000 hours of classroom teaching. I don't think that's objective of GRAAM class. The outcome, the objective of GRAAM is that you train so that you create highly skilled public policy experts. So what does that mean? That is the outcome. Outcome is articulated at the highest level in the scheme. So like we said for Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, we want age appropriate primary school students to achieve age appropriate reading, learning, and arithmetic skills. So that's the outcome. Activities are like sitting in a room, talking and teaching. And normally outcomes are something, outputs are something that you can measure through government scheme, government, like how many students participated, around 28 participated, out of which the gender balance of this class is 50%. See, these are all outcome or activity related administrative. But can you measure outcomes through administrative data? There's no way. So you need to have some special arrangement. For example, in this class, for GRAAM to measure, what should we do?
After training, how much like just go and like do the like impact evaluation in their project, otherwise in the government, otherwise the like whatever task they are given, evaluation of the policies.
Okay, that's what. Immediately, let's say at the end of this course, what should be doing to measure at least some initial outcomes?
Individual case studies, and I'm just giving an example, like anyone who's having a case studies or challenges which they have to take a track of it, like either like we have a presentation coming up. That might be one way of understanding how what we are taking back from this workshop.
Okay, from here on, those who haven't spoken, they have to speak. Okay. So basically, some see the outcome. So you are supposed to become stellar public policy experts, go to various state governments, go to Tata Steel, provide policy and program advice. So there should be some change from your baseline. Hopefully, there is a baseline test. Then you do another test towards the end, which gives you some indications, some quantitative. Do you understand the cross theorems? Do you understand the correlation? Those are the skill set that you are requiring. But in a context, can you put all of them together to find those? So those are outcomes. So outcomes need a different data architecture compared to activities and outcomes. So if you don't have that architecture, you can keep on doing whatever you are doing, but you might actually not end up delivering the type of impacts that you should be delivering. So that is the reason why there's so much of emphasis on outcomes. And like, just imagine, like, I don't know how many of you know, if you go to migrants from Bihar, Jharkhand, in the slum areas, and talk to them, talk to some of your Uber drivers if you are traveling. Many of them have finished their 10th grade, 12th grade, and BSc. And if you actually check their learning level, so it's a very, very low level of learning. So in a way, they have spent so much of time in government schools or other settings, and if they had that human capital, probably they would have contributed to this economy at a much, much higher rate. So in a way, there, because of the system's failure, we couldn't establish that accountability. Uh, in a way, we have the system has let the citizens down, and we can't let it happen. So that's the importance. So now I'll quickly rush through. Basically, you had at the national level, the nation decides to achieve some big goals. We want to grow at 10%, double digit. So if you want to grow at double digit, what are the things that we should do? What generates growth? What are the factors which lead growth? There are so many economists here. Okay, human capital is one. Next, infrastructure is capital. Second, consumption is on the. There are factors of growth. No? Total factor productivity. It is capital. It's finance, human resources, and technology. Technology all put together creates the growth. So human capital is critical. And then of course you need investments to come from domestic savings and external savings. So if you want to achieve 10% of growth, then you have to create those enabling factors. And based on the national goals, the sectors, ministries and others have contribute their part. And how do the ministries and departments contribute? They contribute by to some extent using schemes, central sector schemes and centrally sponsored schemes. But do you think that's all? Like example, what are the instruments that the government has to execute its mandate? One is investments. What are the other mandates through which the government can influence delivery of outcomes? Yes, that is investment, which turns into schemes. And implementation is scheme. But there are other instruments that the government has to which it and to start with, how does the government get money to invest in schemes? Taxes. Taxes is what? Through taxes, it is also telling you what to do, what not to do. Tobacco, tax heavy. That means you consume less. So government has that instrument. What are the other things through which it does? GST. Others. Huh? Foreign investments and bringing capital in the country. Okay. There are a few other things. It is there in those side boxes. If you carefully see, it is there. So, policy is covering all of them. So the other is law. Law. So, the parliament comes with law through which government influences. The laws are what? It leads to, we want to have sustainable growth and non. So what do? We put laws, whoever has pollution, they are penalized. So laws are important. And even to tax, you need to have law, no? You need to have an act to do it. So laws are important. The last one is, when Honorable Prime Minister speaks, everyone in the country listens. So the government has this capacity to influence through information and broadcasting. So that's another instrument. So there are multiple. Then large part of the economy is private sector. So government also does it through regulation. So the schemes parts, the central sector schemes and central sponsor schemes are only one part of the instrument that the government has. It has multiple other instruments through which it influences private sector and its own investments to achieve the national development goals or SDGs. So that's the hierarchy of the outcomes which I want to highlight. The same thing, let's say national level practice, the ministry is contribute to it, and at the bottom it is the centrally sponsored schemes. So I'll come back to these two slides later. So now you have understood. So whatever I'm going to talk here is largely about the central sector centralized sponsored schemes. So each of them, we are giving some money to achieve some outcomes. So outcomes are something that the scheme goals are. Scheme will say that we are going to give you 1 lakh crore to achieve high quality education, whatever. So those are the outcomes. To achieve them, the money is spent in activities which leads to outputs. So what the DMEO does is it takes all the schemes and comes up with outputs and outcomes and comes up with a document. This is if you go to India's budget, finance ministry budget, there's a document called outcomes budget. You can download that document and in which you have for every scheme there's an outlay. I'll come to it. But this is the last one, 2022-23 document, which is on the website. So these are repeated multiple times already. So you have outlay which leads to schemes, schemes lead to outputs, which are largely result of the activities, and the outcomes are result of outcome, which are reflective of the objectives of the scheme. And but it is not that simple. It's not as linear as it is because many times our schemes end up only in activities, not resulting in even outputs. Many times it results in outputs like people schools, teachers are going to school, they are going school kids, but ultimately the kids don't have age appropriate, grade appropriate learning. So so things can fail. So that means it's not linear. So that means when a scheme is designed, when the implementation arrangement is there, I think it's up to you people, who have the multidisciplinary skill set, a deep understanding about the constraints in which the program is implemented to figure out how can these inputs lead to good activities that leading to outputs and outputs actually leading to outputs. So and then you need to have that constraint framework in your mind and apply them. So that's why we need public policy experts to come and tell government how to achieve these outcomes in a more efficient manner. So these are a few things that we do every year. We come up with this document. We have already produced around 4 times this document. This is the framework. If you download the document, what does it have? It has on the right side the amount of resources that have been given for that particular scheme. For example, in the NREGA, it's around 73,000 crores. Then you have what are the outputs of the scheme, the indicators, and the target for that particular year. Then outputs of that outputs, indicators for outcomes and the target. So these are very important. If you want to go and evaluate a scheme, what are the fundamental things you should have okay, I say MG Naraga, please go. Not MG Naraga, some other scheme I should ask you to go and evaluate. What is the first thing that you do? What will you look at first time? And it is okay. Then? Yes. So basically, you are saying that I am going to go and pick up the document of the project when it was approved 5-6 years back. Because we are evaluating. We gave you 50,000 crores to achieve this particular outcomes, and that is what we want to evaluate. So what have they committed at the base? And if we at all we have a base information, nothing like it. So we can see the delta. Most of the time in government schemes, the documents, original documents are not available on the website. you keep on searching for them, then you will figure out what's the scheme. Then, even if you get the document, the outputs outcomes are not properly articulated. There's no accountability, and the worst part is there's no baseline information. So now we have to figure out how to evaluate. So evaluation is not going to be that easy in most of the cases. So this is the time when I'll leave this slide so you can go through it. Then what I'm trying to do is I'll try to take you through quickly through Department of Rural Development. How does this home finally translate? So every year we have a review meeting of various ministries. Anyway, the whole effort is to build the accountability from. If you go to Ministry of Finance, they're just looking at expenditures. If we want to move it from expenditures to achievement of outputs and achievement of outcomes, and to build that accountability right at the budget stage itself, we are saying that you have to achieve these outputs and outcomes for this year. And then at the end of the year, at the honorable vice chairman level, that member level, that's some sort of an annual meeting to review what is the progress. So Ministry of Rural Development is one of the largest departments of Government of India. It runs NREGA, it runs Pradhan Mantri Sadak Yojana, Awas Yojana, livelihood program, Ajivika, and then some pension schemes also. So its budgets have been increasing, but you can see, 2021, suddenly there's a big spike in the budget. Any idea why there's such a large spike?
COVID integration.
What is the which hardly do?
Yes, like
And also increase the MG Narika expenditures because a lot of migrants have gone back. So, these are broadly RD schemes are divided into various outcomes. One is employment, the second is infrastructure, third is housing, and fourth is social security program and welfare. So, out of them, majority of the fund actually goes to Atma Gandhi Narega, then some of it goes to housing and so on. So, what is the type of review that we do? So, this is the screenshot of the reviews that we do. So, broadly, we look at last few years budget allocation. We also look at what is the expenditure vis-a-vis the budget allocation. Because if the scheme is not doing well, the first indication is that the budget doesn't move. Whatever money is given, only 50%, 70%. So that tells that there is something seriously wrong in the design. Either the implementation capacity is not there or something. So that is the first step. But our government generally expenditures are fine, but sometimes there are problems. So we look at the budget allocation. So budget is normally at the B stage, it's estimate. Then somewhere in the middle of the year, we have revised estimates. Like MG Narika, the budget estimate is 73, but somewhere in the middle, given the current economy and others, there will be a lot more demand, so it will be increasing to 1 lakh crore or so. Then towards the end is the final estimates, actual estimates. So there are three types of budgets: estimate, revised estimate, and actual. So we look at it. Then on the left hand side, we have various outputs. They are committed to various targets, and we look at the achievement. So we look at last 2 years, this last year and the year before, and based on variations, we have some discussions. Now this is not perfect because we still have a problem on measurement of outcomes, defining outcomes and measuring. But still, it's better than just talking about expenditures. And so these are I'll leave this, but I think I'll come to the last part of my presentation. I'm going to start with engineering. How many people have some idea of engineering, and what are their views about it? Thank you, sir.
It is. It will. So there is a compass. Certain number of it's based on the household. Household, some there needs to be a budget.
Anyone else would like to give it? Yes. They don't work in oxygen. Okay. Anyone else? Oh, have you gone and seen any of these works? Anyone has seen any engineering work?
Then the curious, how you live in a village.
Okay. So, what did you do in a village? Let us tell some experiences relating to government schemes.
Not government schemes completely under before COVID, we were working on a future in a program called 1480. So for that, we were interacting with various paras of the village, where we had the chance to interact with the school children and understand what is their understanding, like what they want to do, much more we have to contribute towards the future about their future also. So we were trying to introduce them to various vocational programs also, and also so that they avoid the drop out. So we were introducing them to various literacy programs like the digital literacy, financial literacy, and hands-on skills also.
Oh. So anyway, I'll just quickly rush through it. Basically, as some colleagues have already said, it's an entitlement-based scheme. Anyone in rural area, if they don't have employment, they can go and register, and government has to provide at least maximum 100 days employment for a household. So, wage employment in a year. So it's unskilled manual labor, but the whole thing is to create also productive assets. So it's employment generation and also creation of assets. Well, it's to strengthen the livelihood schemes. So tell me, if this is what MG is, I divide households in a village into 5 quintiles, poorest to richest. Where do you think MG benefit should go? Should it go to richest households or poorest households, or it should be equal?
Poorest households.
One.
Maybe
You need one. So that's what your expectations. What are the other expectations across the country, for example? Which state MG Narega fund should be going to? UP. That is, yeah. Yeah, agriculture is low productivity, where people, yeah.
It's not a bio station.
Okay. So, I always thought this was a great scheme and doing something. But in one high-level meeting, one very influential person said, NT Narega is a Bolero scheme. What do you mean? So, the Sarpanchas buy one Bolero every year using engineering. So he was basically talking about rent seeking that takes place. So it shocked me. I wanted to understand what's the wrong reality. So it's a scheme across whole of the country. And normally you read literature review, then you have an idea that this scheme is doing extremely well in Chhattisgarh, Rajasthan. So people, activists, they are seeing that things are doing well. But I'm also hearing any Bolero scheme. So it's like I was totally confused, So it is so important that we ultimately everyone has their own biases. Even me, it was a great scheme and I would only see the positive side. Then I figured, let me see whatever data, wherever it is, let me put all of them together and triangulate and try to figure out what. Then I realized that 77th round of NSS asked two questions about engineering. It asked every rural household whether you have an engineering card. Okay. And the second is if you have an engineering card, whether you have worked on engineering in last 360. Only two questions were asked. It's a agriculture situation analysis survey, but it has asked two critical questions. Then there was local data on ministry's website on engineering. So I put them together, and this is the picture that comes out. You know, so 100% of Mizoram households have engineering card. Close to 96.7% of them get benefit from engineering. Then Tripura, Nagaland, Rajasthan. So on the left side is the job card, and the right side is percentage getting. But the most shocking is one of the remote are Gujarat, Maharashtra. In fact, it's not here, but in the next slide, probably this is much better. This is, I think, the household level population estimate survey base. On the x-axis is rural households who undertook work in engineering in last 365 days. On y-axis is the per capita monthly expenditure. So as you can see, Bihar, UP, Madhya Pradesh, Jharkhand, Odisha, these are very low per capita expenditure. But shockingly, they also have very low benefit of engineering. So you said the highest should be in these states, no? And that's logical. Area of change is it's meant for the poorest households. Whereas we find states like Kerala, which is one of the richest states, having much higher use of engineering compared to Bihar. Bihar only around 5% of the households have engineering benefit. Around 30%, close to 25% in Kerala say they have benefit. So one of my staff, senior staff works, he's from Kerala. He always kept on saying, basically, government betu customer the contractor JCB used to काम करता है. This are not anecdotal, but this data basically shows that some serious distortions have happened over the year, and this is a flagship program of government. We have been implementing it for past 15 years. Okay, and somewhere someone should have seen it and then made some tweaks, you know. So I did further analysis of it. Basically, regression. It's not about. So this is the poverty distribution of engineering. So the green is the percentage of households in various expenditure quintiles who have engineering benefit. So the highest benefit is in the second richest quintile, 26.6, compared to 22.6 in the poorest quintile. So something seriously wrong is going. So in a village, if you want to distribute money without actually doing the work, so who will get it? It's the richer households. They are the people who have power and influence. So what will people in Madhya Pradesh or Bihar do? This team which is supposed to provide them employment in a village, they have total access. So what will they do? They in large numbers migrate to Punjab, Delhi, and so forth. So the point I'm trying to say is that monitoring is important. You can have some information, but I think there's need for us to move more and more towards the outcomes. In engineering, probably one of the outcomes should be what's the percentage of engineering money going to the poorest households instead of having, you know. So we need to fine tune our measurements and then communicate this to the bureaucracy. अभी तो ठीक है भाई कितना एक्सपेंडिचर हो रहा है उससे चल जाएगा. So this is how across the country in various states the patterns are emerged. There are only 4 or 5 states in which the green color ones which I have highlighted where the pattern and what you have said is seen. Where the highest achievement, highest engineering is in the poorest quintile and much lower in the richest quintile. except just Madhya Pradesh, like Orissa, I think it has probably better governance, Gujarat and Maharashtra. Then you have states like UP, Bihar is also good, but overall the state's capacity to use these funds is so low that it's at a very low level. Majority of the places, it is like the richest quintile and the poorest quintile in the same amount have gone and very, very distorted. So you couldn't, you know, you can't get this true until you focus on the outcomes. And whatever the administrative data is saying, you have to go to the households and try to figure out whether it is learning outcomes, whether it is engineering, whether it's any other scheme. The truth is actually when you actually go to the households, talk to them, and through a systematic process get information. Unfortunately, that architecture is weak. We need to strengthen, and our policies and programs have to be fine-tuned on a real-time basis. We can't do this type of analysis once in 15 years. अभी करने की भी कोशिश करेंगे कुछ होगा नहीं क्योंकि you have built so much of vested interest, you know, around the schemes. Then never come into touch. Then they'll go and do some dharma and do something else. So it's very important that as soon as the scheme is launched, we on a real-time basis, you know, as soon as possible, we do concurrent evaluations. We focus on the clearly defined outcomes and then trust. So that's where it is. And if you have any questions, I can respond. I'll give my email address. We'll be positions in DMEO. If someone is interested, please apply. So that's the outcome of.
So much, I think there cannot be anything more delight than this. Like not only lecture and bonus, you are getting a job offer, but the application offer. It was wonderful going through the various ways government to get the data, understand it, interpret it, and probably also make decisions. We'll take questions now, and before the friends here think about your questions, please keep your questions ready. I've got a couple of questions from the people who are seeing online. I'll just read it actually. This question is from Mr. Manish, who works in the development sector. So I'll put it in short actually. There was no written and lengthy paragraph. The simple thing is actually, normally our government programs keep extending deadline, it will not get completed within time, etc. And there are despite many internal audits, etc., is not yielding any results. So how about what's your opinion on engaging third party evaluations and monitoring, third party institutions to do the evaluation and monitoring so that government can get information quickly. Secondly, also say that both questions. So he has actually some of the times government stops very important schemes in between. Like because you turn up, close on the schemes, the moment government change, one would have one government stopped by another government. How can you ensure this kind of schemes to have a sustainable continuity irrespective of political party?
So like whenever as a professional you go and you're asked to do a third party evaluation, broadly the first box is the design itself. If the design is flawed, obviously the outcomes will not come. The second box is implementation. If you have gone to the village, there are 700 schemes. In the village, there are only 5-6 people who are going to it. The same health worker is supposed to do 1,000 things. The same Anganwadi worker. So it's so easy in Delhi to say all the schemes. So the implementation arrangement, whether the state, one joint secretary sitting is supposed to do 20, 30 things, and another new one. So I wrote DMEO on April 1st. 2nd April, they all pulled me to a room and they said, imagine 125 centuries sponsor schemes in within 4 months' time. And you know, we had, there were like 15 people just like you in my staff. No one had any clue what evaluation means, and we thought they're complex. So this is how truth is in government. So the design issue, then it is driving forward. Yes, then you get political columns. You have a 5-year cycle now. After the politicians want to put, but also want to get elected next time. So they are coming up with churning with scheme after scheme after scheme, and hardly any time is there to actually do the detailed design or think about the implementation. जितना भी पैसा है बना दो उसको, because that is what the impact you see. So no one is thinking, but as a professional, you have to get into the design part, get into the implementation part, and see. So most of the scheme evaluation, I'm not interested in that because I know in fact both from the way implementation is done, the way designs are, scheme design. But I think evaluation who's to reinforce, bring out the issues relating to design and implementation, and get all the key stakeholders in a room and have a discussion around it. So evaluation is not about judgment, it's about learning. It's not about accountability, it's about learning. So how do you do learning? Learning is by bringing all the stakeholders, making them feel that we are not threatening them and we are learning. And most of the learning is actually in those people who are actually implementing. So we said that from terms of reference to insert a report, to midterm report and reports, we have to sit with all the stakeholders. Because everyone is committed to take this country. And it's not the prerogative of DMEO or DG. I'm not the only person who is interested that this country should. What gives me a special prerogative? And I know that if I'm sitting on the other side, I will also do the same thing because I'm so constrained. So it's very important for us to have empathy also. It's not like the inspector large type going and judging. So that means once you do that, I think you create a learning environment. And together as a country, together as a society, we bring all the stakeholders. As an evaluators, I think we have the power to bring all the stakeholders together, whether it is community, government, private sector, civil society, and others, and put them into a room and engage. And most important is learning. So yes, there will be delays, there will be failures, but the important thing is we have to fail quickly. We have to learn as fast as possible and use them to do better. So that's about the first part. So most of our evaluations that we do in DMEO is collaborative, it's partnership based. It's about learning. It's about not about judging or the second part. It's more of political economy. It's beyond my pay scale to talk about it. But generally, I think if the scheme is doing well, then we enough political consistency to make sure that it does. Say MG Nadiga, it has gone through multiple governments, the national. Likewise, Pradhan Mantri selected, then Aadhaar. So when it is on a solid foundation, when there is good media and public support, it's very difficult for politicians to do it. So when it's a shoddy plan, very short-sighted, then the politicians have much. Politicians come from grassroots. They sit with the people, they talk. All bureaucrats, we sit in high air conditioned room, they have no clue outside. So then they come, when they get elected, they come with the service. And they are more responsible for the public that the civils are unseconded now, 35 years, no one can do anything to me, whether I work or not. Politicians, the next 5 years, they'll be gone, they don't deliver. So it's not, many times they have very wrong issues, they have much better sense of political pulse. And if they decide, if they do a wrong decision, they'll be more about the next elections. So, I think it's all about impact. And if it is good scale, there are some good things, probably they have come up with a design stronger, including those good parts.
Yes, sir. Thank you. That was wonderful. I think one thing continuously and systematically get evaluated is politicians. I guess every 5 years there will be some evaluation of them. Another question from an NITI fellow who's working on the aspirational district.
says why can't we make our portals, the data portals open at the district level so that people can monitor about expenditure so that siphoning of money can be avoided. And is there any
So it is online?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yes. So which district I'm from? Where are you? And
he can't
He
speak.
will not be able to answer. He's from Baraj, UP.
so information is common. So the whole effort is to put as much information in public domain so that equity and be a tool for empowerment at every level, whether it is village, whether it is block, state. So currently our data architectures are a little bit feudal in their nature. So we keep on collecting data, but we don't share it. Sometimes we don't share between the ministries. So we need to have, I think that's a policy that we're struggling with. We need to come up with a clear cut data sharing policy. And I think data has to be a tool for empowerment at every level. So whether it is village, whether it is state. So it should provide insights on where the current situation is, and it should help in fine tuning approaches. So there's no doubt about it. And some schemes, government India is so diverse. So you can't say the statement about India average. There are schemes like rural development. Everything is transferred to this website. Engineering, you go and download, you will have on a daily basis data about expenditures by district, by state, by nation, and so forth. Some places it is very opaque, most of, but what I have seen is that wherever there is demand from the public, activists or media, the government responds. Like in rural development, there are a lot of activists involved. So governments generally respond and they try to be a lot more open. But they have a long journey, saying that there's a lot more, we need to have a lot more maturity, a lot more trust in sharing. But NITI currently, I think we are struggling with NITI and others on data sharing policy.
Thanks. Any questions from here?
I know I have taken this question in time, but I can ask this. DMEO does a wonderful evaluations and such work. How binding is the ministries to actually respond to your reports and act on it? Is it binding or it's just an advisory role?
Okay. So it was interesting. Since we don't have a evaluation policy, it's still an evolving situation. But I think there is a government. It's fortuitous. It's not very well thought through. But luckily, it worked. There's a chief cabinet secretary decision, government decision that no scheme will move from earlier we used to have plan period. Now planning is gone. But we have 5 year schemes. So any approval of a scheme is only for 5 years or 4 years. So now we have made scheme configuration quotas with finance commission. So that means from 15 finance, now it's 15 finance commission. If the scheme has to continue into 16 finance commission, it has to go through third party evaluation. So that is where I think the importance of evaluation has automatically increased. Luckily, when I joined, then it was 14 or 15. Only thing is that the government focused on deciding who will do the evaluation. So the day I joined, they said, "Acha, aage say so 4 weeks." So, but it is now set. Now that it is there, what we are realizing is that the power to continue the scheme is with the Department of Expenditure. They don't have the bandwidth. There are only 10 civil service in there. So now you have to be very smart. You can't come 1,000 page report. We did 125 centuries for the scheme evaluation. The total number of pages are like 11,000 pages or something. Like this here now. Like each report is this big. So we realized that no one is going to read this. And maybe some people will read selected part. So how do we communicate to busy civil servants? So we came up with executive summary. then that also was running into 60 pages. I realized heavy putting in it. So we had a framework for evaluation, which we said relevance, efficiency, effectiveness, sustainability, and impact. Then we were also looking at 50 cost-cutting themes: climate change, gender, use of IT, affordability, transparency. So ये एक पेज के ऊपर कलर कोडिंग दे दी. तो इसे ग्रीन मन अच्छा कर रहा है, येलो है तो इम्प्रूवमेंट के लिए स्कोप है, लाल means bad. Then we gave those rating. The whole discussion at the highest level would be only on that. And it evoked so much of emotion. Like ministries would feel very upset of all reason. And we wanted it. Because many times we go and do it, they're so indifferent, you know. कोई बात ही नहीं कर रहे. At least आपको ये देते ही फिर गुस्सा होके you would really come after us. Then we will negotiate, let's say, lower the on this, and this year matches. So, but so that's one part of it. Anyway, how do you? So it's not about doing evaluation, but our end goal is to get the important lessons incorporated, and there's a change, and people are willing. But the most important thing is we worked as a partner with our ministries and partners. So terms of reference we उनके साथ बैठे. तो शुरू में आते थे मीटिंग में कोई बात ही नहीं करते, वो कोविड आ गया तो साइलेंट. Then I realized, so sometimes I would write letter to secretaries or my attachment. भाई देखो evaluation करने कुछ गड़बड़ हो जाएगा तो don't blame me later on. At least your people should read that book and give comments. So that is something that we have to do. We have to force them. कोई नहीं पढ़ते, no. So then we make a presentation. को पूरा को summarize करके एक घंटे में presentation और बार बार quiz वगैरह to evoke emotions from them. So somehow you have to force them to at least be part of it and respond. And once they start responding, they start getting involved and so forth. So by the end, what we have seen, sir, is that they started using the DMEO's report, which was, I feel, is a co-creation. It's not DMEO. Because our consultants were also, they had no clue what government is. Come and do their own stuff. So slowly they were bringing it to a point where they would add something, but they would also learn from grassroots constraints. And we were facilitating the whole process. Is that there was ownership of the evaluation, and many times they were using our whole document into the EFC notes. So by the time it went for EFC, majority of the recommendations were already there, and some of them, for whatever, then there were some very activist, very good civil servants in Department of Experience, so very sincere. They would take our report and say, out of 10 requirements, only 5 requirements, baki 5 don't India. So overall, it worked, but it has to be institutionalized. It is personality based. But it worked. As I said, that empathy, that respect for people in the field, trying to work together. There's so much everyone can learn. We have a but people, civil servants also have perspective. I think putting all those perspectives together, because they are the people who know the constraints in which they have to implement the program. So that means empathy, understanding the other person's before passing. Thank you. Any questions?
So, I have a very basic question. How often such a scheme of because more often than not, I think policymakers and the government might impose certain schemes on certain people, not realizing that they don't want that. They might want something else for instance. So, how do you go about that?
No, you are absolutely right. And the larger question is also, we are also budget constrained. So this money can be used in multiple places. So how do you prioritize? So the prioritization and allocation of budget is all a political process. So democratically elected representatives. We expect that these democratically elected representatives have a better understanding of the pulse of the people, that they are the ones who make sure that the assignments are done. Notwithstanding the type of democratic process, there could be issues. So one way is to through an empirical uh, semi-quantitative qualitative process. We need to highlight, bring these aspects to the concerned political executive. So that means when you are doing concurrent evaluation and or the deadline evaluation or midterm evaluation, I think it's important to have this type of semi-quantitative, qualitative kind of questions, saying that how do you rate this program? Do you think some other alternative? What type of changes you would like? What type of how better this money can be used and so forth. So it's not just about the scheme itself, but also related questions there. But I think it's a very valid question.
Because the NSS questions that you were talking about, the question was, do you have a card and when are you employed? Have you been employed for the past week, right? So if you ask the question as to do you really want that, I think that would be more, that would give more insight because we are making a basic assumption that they want to be employed under NITI.
Yeah. No, in fact, NSS previous one, 70th round, I didn't show the slide here. They actually asked whether you really want. So that also showed out of the total households, only around 60% actually wanted for, not 100%.
Thank you. I'll take one question, probably it's the time to finalize. So we can probably ask offline, yeah.
So my name is Vivek. So my question basically is based on the last slide that you have shown. You talked about concurrent evaluations. So I just wanted to know with the current existing structure of the evaluation framework that we follow, how ready is India to conduct those concurrent evaluations in the current perspective? Or if we say we need to change certain aspects or certain framework, what all those frameworks would be in all suggestions?
Yeah, I think what you have asked is a very important question. My own sense is on monitoring, maybe on a scale to 0 to 10. We are probably somewhere around 7. I think we are one of the really used this to improve on DPP or I think India is fantastic. Even very cynical, skeptical journal like Economist has finally launched. So that's on the we have used the digital means, we have gone in for universal, in a way, transfer basically comparison. On the information part of journey, I think we are somewhere between 0 or 3 or something you decide where it is, except for Karnataka. Karnataka is the only state and thanks to Dr. Gaurav and first Dr. Baswaraja. I was also shocked, like how can Karnataka be such this ivory tower of success in a country where valuation is so low. But you should actually really go and understand Karnataka evaluation. So nothing like it. So rest of the whole country is very many. Some are almost like 0. So that means for the next we have to build these capacities. Someone has come from Madhya Pradesh planning who is still from this. So you are there. What is the capacity inside? There's very little capacities evaluation for AI is they don't know. Many places the evaluation department has nothing, 0. Some places there's no evaluation department. We have done an assessment of all the evaluation department. Whenever they have never done serious evaluations and process survey. So there is need for us as an institution to move from where we are to a much, much higher level. And we can't do everything ourselves. So that means we need to partner with external universities, external think tanks. And this is where the Professor Sachin has really done some fantastic work in this. By bringing planning department, microphone, tree, open scope, universities. But the government has to foster them. And it's 40 lakh crore budget. What are the you encourage statistics, economic research to build this evaluation process and get people like you to join as researchers. So in doing so, we will build so much of see in the country. Right now, even if you want to be actually you put that capacity because you have to learn by doing. So we have a long journey to do. So that's why we have recently done environment of monitoring and evaluation institutions. So if you can figure out like 200, 300 institutions, then we should provide government schemes, but just give them money, build centers of excellence, get researchers, get some computers, startup software, don't be that GIS, GPS, and build this whole capabilities across the country. And then state governments and districts can work with them, right? Developmental content. So bring some money. So instead of this intuitive based decision making that we do, we should start moving more and more towards evidence-based, empirical research. And for that, we need to go into the field, do a lot more surveys than what we are doing now. A lot more qualitative work, deep discussions, key comments, and then synthesize that whole knowledge and bring it back to the policy makers, politicians and policy makers.
Thank you, sir.
This is only a small question, very small question. SCA department, government SCA department has a system of internal audit and external audit, CAG audit. Can we link NITI Aayog this evaluation program, project evaluation, link it with that audit process so that because there can be synergy because they are also in the same direction for the same objective, same direction.
I don't, as I said, we don't want to be policemen. So the because evaluation is also about the learning, and it's not about strict rules. Audit में क्या है कि finance में ये चीज करना चाहिए, ये ऐसा करेंगे so it's all rule based. Development is not linear. There's so many factors you never know which factor is responsible for what. So constantly you keep learning, understanding, and moving towards it. The only thing is we just need to understand this is the destination we want to go and where are we at every stage, and then do the course correction and keep moving. So, but I think little bit more accountability towards outcomes are important, but more important before we do all of that is set up that institutional and ecosystem to move towards that. And I think that is where Karnataka has done it. They have a good institutional setup. They have a very good external ecosystem where agencies, big entities like GRAAM are constantly providing support in environment institutions, outsourcing studies, but also, and they have brought some experts from outside to help them interpret these results. So it's about, you can't enforce it, you have to build these capabilities.
Thank you. So we'll stop the questions here. In fact, before we listen to Professor Chaturvedi, so that what Dr. Sekhar Bonu was saying about like the large reports and bureaucrats not being able to go through it, don't keep doing such finding such solutions for the problems. As our objective is not to research and but also to work with the government and system to bring changes either at the program or policy level. One such efforts our team has made today. So we have evaluated either Cornell and Kaushalya Yojana recently, provided an exhaustive report, but we it's kind of we consider this as an opportunity to release some of the fact sheets related to our evaluation and DMEO service here and as well as process of research into the disease. So we'll take few minutes to launch the fact sheets. Sir, may I get
Listen, man, can you use? There are two volumes. Specifically. Only presents completely.
Jesus. Only the HDR, straightforward, not sugar. This specific question, actually makes if you say over the entire success to you, the roadmap on it. So, yeah, it's the solution of what actually we have to give you solution, not just take you God. There's some. Absolutely, we have to share. Yeah. This is unbelievable. How much is presenting this market? So of course we bring out much more value. Thank you for this honor to launch this vaccine today. Thank you. He's the brains behind the fact. I really recognize the efforts of my team at the as well as the work with this very extensively. And Ashita, who is telling the story in the way it should be told. That. My request and person to talk. Thanks. Thank you. Thank you. I think at the onset, I must congratulate grassroots research and a movement to bring all of us together, create this opportunity, and contribute on a larger scale where India is actually looking at the successes that are required from our policy process. And what Sekhar Bonu has done today is in terms of exposing you to that target, to midway your sort of program, which I say is more for orientation, more for inspiration, more for motivation. I think is also an endeavor in terms of how we should look at the whole process of evaluation, assessment, be that monitoring and evaluation, whatever we say, is in terms of going through that large canvas that is needed. And I was seeing the expertise that comes in terms of environment sciences, the corporate communication, social work, IR, tribal studies, political science, social entrepreneurship, all different backgrounds, where exposure to quantitative techniques is not obviously there. And since it is not there, when we talk about evaluation and we are exposed to numbers, we get slightly perplexed and we think that it is not something that we should be working. Coming from IR, we think that numbers is not our game. And what are they talking? Evaluation is job of economics people or people from statistics. That is not correct. And that's what Sekhar said. I think it is absolutely important for people coming from whatever background to see the rationale and the purpose behind this whole process. And that I think is something which this course is all about. And that's why I was very much keen that people from different backgrounds are. So this is also very important because I come from slightly different context, and that's why when I was thinking of introducing me, I thought I would do myself. Because then I can communicate what I intend to. The idea here is I have been working for the last 20 years on development assistance coming in from various countries to India, and of last 10, 15 years on India's assistance going to outside to other countries. And as you know, for last 3 years, India has jumped up
this huge bracket in a major way. We are now a net provider. This year we gave something like $6.85 billion, and we received only $5.25 billion. So we are providing, and we are providing to almost 38 countries in terms of lines of credit, but in terms of their engagement, more than 80 countries are beneficiary of our programs. So to Vinod and to Shweta Sanju, who is here, I tell them at my office to do impact assessment of our programs. Now, for various reasons, as Dr. Bonu was saying, that you have to have empathy and excellence, because who would monitor who? And that's where the question of we engaging in ourselves and process is important. That accumulates more and more as you move forward. Quantitative assessment or qualitative assessment is just one aspect. It's the technique of it. But the feeling to get that done is something which is extremely important. And that's where the third party assessment, somebody asked the question, third party assessment, that's where it is extremely important. There are opportunities when you do not have the scope to do quantitative or qualitative, but you have the scope to do some exercise of assessment. And I give you one example. Before moving out, Dr. Ashwardhan asked us to do this whole assessment of India's engagement in international science technology. So what to do? The committee was constituted. I was a member along with Dr. Kapotkar. Dr. Kapotkar said, I am going to write a report, you have to write, but let's do the interviews. And we interviewed all the 4 secretaries of various science technology departments. What to do for that international cooperation division? We heard them. There are certain entities that are also engaged. We have a lab in Antarctic missions. We have now Arctic Ocean contributions. How do you assess what is happening and how the third party assessment of this should be done and what are the ways you can do it? So the question is in terms of what Dr. Bonu said, in terms of optimum assessment that you can do. And that assessment comes in from the right questions that you ask, the ability to ask, and that's what he was saying. Again, Ayush Secretary has approached us to do some sort of assessment of the contribution that the government of India has done in terms of creating Ayush market. So within the goods market, now PM has asked them to do the services in the Ayush sector. For last 2 months, we are hanging our head in terms of where to begin. There are spas, there are parlors, there are hotels, there are these ashrams where services of yoga are all across. The rejuvenation centers are there, wellness centers are there. How do you identify? So then we spoke to the MOSPI, we spoke to NSSO, and we identified. So the point that Bonu made in terms of asking the right question, what question you want to ask, and that's where track you go on, whether you go on quantitative track or you go on qualitative is a separate issue. So I'm telling it to those subject areas I mentioned. If at all you get some sort of apprehension about your number skills, don't bother about it. Get into it. Whatever is doing come from. And this is why this course was very important, because it exposes you to this great ability of asking the right question. And that I think is important both in terms of field-based and also online data analysis, because that's where the question of asking whether Ayush programs are actually delivering what they are intended to would depend on your sharpness in terms of asking questions. So how we go forward, in what way we establish these interlinkages that we are talking about. And that's where the whole idea of schemes adoption, its implementation, its evaluation, and the kind of change that you are anticipating, whether it is bringing in. somebody was asking whether schemes required by people or not, in what way they get money. So those questions should come to your mind. You might be sitting in some way, in some office where you are not concerned with evaluation, but your mind should be working on that track. So it's that sensitivity which is important, and the kind of development expenditure. I mean, on infrastructure alone, this budget has capped something like $26.5 billion. And as Sekhar was saying, more and more schemes are 3 years or 4 years. So in the next 4 years, we are intending to spend $48.5 billion. I mean, everybody could jump out of the chair if you see, because no multilateral agency actually thought of India spending so much money on infrastructure. But that's what is happening. But what kind of infrastructure we need? Is it physical infrastructure? Is it social infrastructure? How social infrastructure is linked with the physical infrastructure? In what way exclusions are happening, and in what way inclusions are being ensured by the policy? You don't need any skill for this. Obviously, you need skill to analyze and get it. But to stand on it and to ask as a citizen what is actually being delivered is important. So the institutional architecture, the efforts that state is making is not the role of the state. We as informed community should also take on it. And that's what the purpose of this course is. And I really wish this would create more of this voices. I was given this book of grassroots voices, and I think it captures some of that essence. I was just reading through, and in one place it says what kind of gatherings are coming in of people and what kind of responses you are getting. Something which is very important to distill. So how do you distill that? In what way you get the ideas to present it? The other point that I want to also bring to your sort of attention is also in terms of how we look at some of these numbers. Like these days, I'm very closely working on issues that are related to India's forthcoming presidency of G20, and we are trying to address how India would handle it for more than 1 week. We have been engaged in that. The effort was that the fact that India is one of the biggest recipient of remittances that come from outside. When Obama was president back in 2009, the proposal was that we should bring down the cost of remittances, because for per dollar it was costing something like $12.50, and that was the cost our organization was paying, and India was losing out most because we are the largest recipient, $72 billion. This over the last 10 years now has come down to $7. And our effort is that it should come down to 2. That's the game. Now, if you just tackle this information over the questions that Jacob placed before us, what kind of measurements you actually do, and what kind of gain that one can expect. On the face of it, it may look a very simple information that from this it has come down to this. But the nature of institutional changes that were required to achieve this, do we have more scope in that? That would require quantity process. It would not require quantity. It's just your way to see in what way international transfers are happening. How the dollar transactions can be minimized from one end to another. And why this has happened? And cost has come down in the last 4 years. Why? Because of the huge digitalization that we could achieve out of the banks. And this is not really happening because the banking architecture in India has gone through a huge process of digitalization. After that, you can apply your quantitative distance as to how much expenditure we have to incur. Is the cost same for people in all states, or is it less for people in Maharashtra and Gujarat, where we can connect with the international banks as direct, and for other states where that direct linkage is not there? That much more you can do in terms of quantitative. But in terms of asking right questions, yes. So this course is as much about asking the right questions than about assessments alone, and I think that's the basic idea. The fourth point that I want to make is in terms of the data that we are getting. And as Sekhar was saying, some of the data now you are getting on real-time basis. Be that in form of BharatNet's optical fiber network, every day, every time real-time data is available to you as to how many sort of agencies are coming in and agencies are what kind of a change you are seeing, how from quantity to quality you are making that shift happening and in what way it is contributing. So those dimensions, I think Shiva has delivered, I think marvelously well in terms of giving you sort of expose in terms of the processes, in terms of drawing distinction between the output and outcome, in terms of drawing the distinctions between the way we have been approaching and the kind of rationalization of that process of assessment that is needed. And from that point of view, I think it is also important for us to see that the real data that we face with, in the cases where we have to capture the data and in the way that we need to analyze it. And this, I think, would be extremely important for those of you who are trained with quantitative skills. Those of you who probably might not be having, it is important that we get into that direction. We feel comfortable in the idea of assessment and evaluation. And I'm sure the kind of changes we are seeing at the states, and as Shekhar rightly mentioned, more and more people's aspirations, they are not only driving out politicians, but they are also questioning the professional standards of our economists and those words. So from that point of view, also it is important for us to have that empathy factor within us, seeing as to what is being delivered on the ground and what we are missing out on. And from that perspective also, this course and there's a scope to bring impact assessment, to bring in questions of evaluation are important. And I think it is also pertinent here to mention in terms of how we look at the larger idea, both in terms of identifying the right questions, but also in terms of how we can contribute. And how we can contribute is in terms of bridging whatever knowledge gaps we have. So I saw some of the good quantitative lectures were released and delivered. So that's extremely important. So you can have this bridge on the gap that is there in your training, but that is not something unsurmountable. It is possible and it can be done. It is also, I think, important for us to develop the linkages with the universities and Jacob mentioned. And I think some of these states we are trying in the Pradesh Exam Commission colleagues are here. We also have colleagues from AIDTPA, from RS. They are trying to do these linkages in terms of how we sort of maximize collective gain. I think that's again the larger context within which I feel it is important for us to do that. As country would move in the direction of third-party assessment, a large cadre of evaluators would be required. And if you become part of that, you will be part of the sense. Yeah. Right for evidence, but also important to this definition. Sorry, second call to this you. I told it was fast. It's excellent. Because it's forced to this idea. It's extremely important that we adopt and take this forward. Thank you.
Right. Empathy beyond evidence is something I want to take from this lecture today. It was really encouraging to listen to both the land scholars, their experience speaks. I don't have to say anything else. So we need to ask right questions. That's something I think for next 30 days, whether we become point, etc. If we all come to a frame of mind, how shall we ask right of question and the right question? How do we really understand the causes of the problem, root cause of the problem? That's something that's quite important.